Hello everyone, and welcome to Art is for Everyone here on YouTube. I have a fun project for us today, and I would like to start by going over our supplies. And we're going to be using the Strathmore watercolor postcards, which are simply a student grade cold pressed paper in a 4x6 size. So if you don't have Strathmore watercolor postcards, any watercolor paper will do as long as it's cold press. Even hot press is fine, and you can cut it down to 4x6, okay? And I suggest that you do this more than once, and you'll see that this is a wonderful project to make small like this and then send it out to someone that might need a little happiness in their day. So we're going to be painting sunflowers, and I'm gonna take one of my postcards out, and we're going to be using it in the landscape format, so horizontal, okay, so longer like this. And then I also have a glass of water, some paper towels, a little palette, or even a small salad plate would be fine to mix your colors in. And then I have my 000 squirrel mop. You can use any pointed round watercolor brush. Size 6 or 8 is perfect. I have a pencil and an eraser in case I feel like I need it, but we may not need it in this project. And then I have my beautiful Wildthorne Art is for Everyone palette. And these have all of the colors that we need to create this project. If you do not have these paints, in the description box, I list suitable substitutions for colors that you may already have. And the colors we're using are pretty basic, okay? So, and I'll talk about each of those colors as we use them. So let me just move my palette over here so you can see it a little bit, and then my colors below, and my watercolor paper. So we're going to do a sunflower, but we're going to do a partial sunflower, and we're going to have it sort of come down like a half moon. So let's go ahead and let's draw a little bit. So I'm going to draw the center of the sunflower right here in the center of my paper, and just sort of draw a half circle down, okay? And then my petals will come a little bit further down, so we don't need to draw that, but maybe we'll just start with this half moon, okay? And I'm going to wet my brush, and we're going to start with the petals, all right? So in our Art is for Everyone palette, we have, we basically have two yellows here. We have a brighter lemon yellow called Mimosa, and then we have a yellow called Ochre Léger. And we also have a color called Sienne Brûlée, which is very much like a burnt sienna. So the Ochre Léger would be like yellow ochre, or any kind of warm muted yellow. And then the Mimosa is like a lemon yellow or a Hansa yellow light, okay? So I'm gonna start by picking up some of the Mimosa and making a little well of it in my palette, because I want to add plenty of water to this so it's nice and fluid and juicy. I say juicy a lot. It's one of my favorite words for watercolor, because it's watercolor and we need water to get the most out of it. So you see, I'm just adding water to this puddle of paint. So I have this nice reservoir of this cool lemon yellow. And I'm going to do the same with the Ochre Léger, or yellow ochre. I'm going to pick it up on my brush and make a nice well of it next to the Mimosa. And this takes a minute to get our paint ready, but it's really nice because then our paint is nice and fluid, and we can just pick up our paint from our palette instead of having to dip it into the pan over and over again. Okay, so I'm giving myself a nice reservoir of this paint, adding plenty of water to it so it's nice and fluid. And then in the next section of my little palette, I'm going to add the Sienne Brûlée, or burnt sienna, which is sort of a natural earthy orange. We don't need quite as much of that, but we'll still give ourselves a nice little puddle of it in our palette. Plenty of water in there. And before we go any further, we're going to mix a color in the center here that's going to be the center of our sunflower. And so I want it to be deep, and I'm going to start with the Cian Brûlée. And make a nice puddle of that in the center. And then I'm going to add a little bit of the Bleu Primaire. So one brush full. Just sort of drop it in there. And then I'm going to use my raw umber, which is a nice dark brown. Raw umber or even burnt umber would be fine. Sepia, Van Dyke brown, all of those browns are fine. So when I mix that up, you see I have a really nice rich brown. I want to gray that out a little bit more. So I'm going to add more of my Bleu Primaire until it becomes more gray than brown. Okay? And when we mix our colors like this, we get more variation in our washes. So it's really a good idea to mix this dark gray brown instead of using it straight from a tube, let's say sepia, because then we're not going to get all the subtle variations when we paint it on. So my brush is nice and clean, and that's important when we're painting with yellows. And I'm going to start painting the petals. And this is a really simple thing. So I'm going to start with the mimosa or the light yellow. Hold on one second. Okay. And I'm going to start with the point of my brush, okay, toward the half moon. I'm going to put the point down and I'm going to press my brush down, okay, pull it out and lift it up. All right, so let's do that again. Start here, press it down, pull it out, and lift it up. Now, I'll do 2 petals at a time, okay? And then I'm going to pick up some of the ochre léger, all right? And I'm going to drop it in toward the center. And I'm just going to sort of tilt my watercolor paper and let it flow. I pick up my mimosa again, start here, put my point down, press it down, move it out, and lift it up. So I'm getting this petal shape when I do that, okay? Put it in, press it down, lift it up. And I'm being very random. Put it down, press it down, pull it out, and lift it up, all right? Grab some of the ochre léger, drop it in, sort of lift my card so it moves a little bit. And this is our first layer of petal. We're doing it this way because we want a little variation in the color from the very beginning. So put my point down, press it down, pull it for a while, lift it up. Put my point down, press it down, pull it, and lift it up. And you see how by varying the shapes of the petals, I'm getting a more realistic look. Okay, I'm getting the shape and the fluidity of sunflower petals and the randomness. So I'm picking up more of the light yellow, putting it down at the circle, pressing down, pulling out, lifting up, put it down, press it down, lift it up, grab some of the ochre léger, drop it in, lift it up. Some are going to be lighter, some are going to be darker, just like in nature. A couple more here. Put it down, lift it up, put it down, lift it up, a little bit more. And then take my ochre léger, drop it in, and then tilt my paper so it just sort of flows around. Now that is our initial layer for the petals of the sunflower. Right away, I'm going to pick up some of that dark brown and I'm going to drop it in to the center of the sunflower, all the way to the edge. And then as I come down, I'm going to bring it to the edge of that circle that we drew, where our petals start, and barely touch the edge of those petals. Okay? I can lift it and let it flow a little bit. But I don't want it to go too much into the petals yet. While it's still wet, I'm going to grab a little bit of the Cienne Brûlée and I'm just going to touch it around the edges. And then lift it up and again let it flow just a little bit. Okay? Now, this is our first layer. If I have any pooling of paint, I can take a clean, dry brush and just sort of wick it up so I don't have too much paint there to dry. So now that this layer is down, we want to let it dry before we come back for our second layer. So go ahead and do that, let it dry, and then we'll jump back in and do our second layer. Okay, so my watercolor is now dry enough. It's not totally dry, but it's dry enough. And so we're going to continue on. Let me open up my water. I have to close my water jar every time I leave so my cats don't knock it over. So we're going to go back to our ochre léger now, and we're going to put another layer onto our petals. Give me 1 second. I just want to grab something. Okay. There, okay. They're working on the road in front of our house today and we have no water, so I had to melt ice to make water. And I wanted to get my drink, I'm thirsty. Okay, so we're gonna start with our ochre léger. I'm gonna grab a little bit more. Just freshen that up a little bit. And we're gonna start over here at the left-hand side, and we're just gonna put a swipe of ochre léger starting here at the base, pushing our brush down and lifting it up, okay? So start at the base, put our brush down, press it, and lift it up. Start at the base, put our brush down, press it, and lift it up. And we're gonna move around and do that on every petal. Press it down, lift it up. Start at the base, press it down, lift it up. Start at the base, press it down, lift it up. No particular shape, we're just adding a little bit more color to each petal. Press it down, lift it up, and one more. Press it down, lift it up. I'm going to put a little bit more on these two, on this one, because I want to see that color, okay? Now, while that's still wet, I'm going to take my burnt sienna, or my Cienne Brûlée, and I'm just going to swipe it through each petal where it's wet. Even just sort of dropping it in, just to give it a little bit more definition toward where the petals meet the flower. All right? Now, we're going to also put one more layer on the inside of our sunflower. So I'm going to pick up that dark mix that we made, and again I'm going to drop it in, just sort of move it around, and then as I get closer to the edge I take a little more care pull it all the way to the edges, pick up some of the burnt sienna and just drop it in, little touches of it toward the edge. All right, so once again, we're going to let this layer dry. This painting is not difficult, but we do need to do it in layers so we get the effect that we want to achieve of layered color. So I'm going to let this dry again, and then we'll be back to do another layer. Okay, so this layer is now almost dry. It's dry enough, okay? So we're gonna go back and we're gonna use our yellow ochre again, our ochre léger. I'm gonna mix up a little bit more in my palette. And this time we're gonna go in between, okay? So we're gonna put our brush down in between the petals, push down, lift up. In between, push down, lift up. In between, push down, lift up. In between, push down, lift up. See, I need a little bit more. In between, push down, lift up. In between, push down, lift up. And so by doing this, we're creating yet another layer of petals, okay? And then once that's down, I'm going to pick up the burnt sienna again, and I'm just going to touch through where I put these new petals. Just adding a little bit more darkness to those. All right, now we're going to do another layer on our sunflower center using that dark color again. Drop it in. All of these layers create depth. And then take a little more care and bring it to the edge where it meets the petals. Drop in a little crème brûlée or burnt sienna at the edges where the petals meet. Okay? And then we're going to take up a little bit. First of all, you'll see that some of this starts to pool here. If I just take a clean, dry brush and swipe it through, it picks up that extra paint. So I'm going to rinse my brush, dry it off, and I'm going to grab some of the Bleu Primaire from my palette, and using the tip of my brush, I'm just going to drop in little dots of the Bleu Primaire while it's still wet. And a little bit more of my burnt sienna just right at around the edges of where the petals meet. Then I'm going to take clear water and I'm just going to sprinkle it on just a little bit. Dry my brush off, and again, I'll wick up some of that extra paint that pools at the edge. I can even lift it a little bit. There. So we're going to continue on while it's still wet. And I'm going to grab more of the crème brûlée and just bring in a little bit more. Just swipe my brush through where the petals meet the edge. Just to give it a little bit more definition there. Now, this layer is now done. Our next layer, we're going to wait till this dry, and our next layer we're going to take some more of the mimosa and swipe it through just to brighten it up a little bit, okay? But before we stop, this is now dry enough. Give me 1 second because I think I put it away. Hold on. When I was making my sample earlier, I had my salt here, and then my husband used it for breakfast. So I'm putting a little bit of salt, just plain salt in my hand, table salt. And then picking up a little bit of it and just lightly sprinkling just a tiny bit onto the dark area of the sunflower. Just a little tiny bit. And what that does is as it dries, it'll start to push the pigment around and give us a little bit of a speckled look and really bring out all those colors that we've added to our sunflower. Okay? So we're going to let this dry completely now. It has to be totally bone dry for us to remove the salt and to continue on. All right, so let it dry and then we'll be back. Okay, so our sunflower is now dry, and the first thing we're going to do is remove our salt. So you can either take a soft brush and just sort of whisk it away, but sometimes you'll notice that some of the pieces get stuck on the paint, so you've got to use your fingers a little bit. And I think you can see where the salt made little dots, okay? So that's what we're looking for. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to put some glazes on our sunflower. And actually, I'm just going to start with a new section of my palette here. And I want to grab more of that mimosa and make a nice glazing color. So I'm going to put some in my palette. And then add a little water to it. So it's really fluid and sort of pale, but still bright. And I'm going to go around the entire sunflower and I'm going to carefully paint a glaze layer of this lighter color. So I'll start here and just very carefully paint over everything we've painted so far. So you can see that I have to sort of pay attention when I get out here to the edges. And just carefully paint these petals. All right? Starting at the center and working out to the very tips. And some of the initial petals that we put down with the light yellow, we're going to have to just really pay attention and notice them. But what you'll see right away is that it starts to bring everything to life by glazing. So glazing is when we use a very transparent wash of watercolor on top of what we already have down, just to sort of unify it and bring it to life. It does not hide all of the work we've done before, but it just makes it more vibrant. It's a very transparent layer. So you can see I'm just carefully working around, and then when I get to the tips, I'm really careful to just go to the end of the tip and not any farther. So glazing is really a wonderful technique to learn. For any projects that we do, we can unify many layers of work by just putting this light glaze of transparent color on top. I'm just working my way around and making sure that I reach every petal that we've put down. I'm not changing them, the shape of them, but I'm just going over what I already have because I really want that randomness. It's so beautiful. And it's so natural. Because even though we're not looking at a sunflower and really carefully painting every petal exactly as we see it, we're still giving the illusion of a real sunflower, okay? So now that layer is dry and I'm very, very happy with it. I have a lot of dimension here. I have many different layers of yellow. So I'm going to turn my painting around and I'm going to mix up another glazed layer. And this time I'm just going to use the Bleu Primaire. And take some of that, put it into my palette, and add plenty of water to it so it's nice and transparent. So it's a nice glowing blue. Okay? And I'm going to use that color to glaze over very lightly. I'm not moving the paint underneath. I'm just dropping this glaze in to the center of the sunflower. So everything I've done before, you can still see it, but I'm just adding this new dimension of color. Just really drop that blue in there and let it run down to the edge, and then you can clean and dry your brush off and just sort of wick up anything that falls down so we don't get any pooling. Okay, so I'm very, very happy with that. But for one final touch, all right, I'm going to take my Cienne Brulee and pull some of that over here into this side. And I'm going to add a little bit of the ochre leger to it, just to lighten it and warm it up a little bit. So I've got sort of this golden ochre color. I'm going to dry my brush off really well so I get all the wetness out of it, roll it to a point, and then just pick up that pure color. And while these leaves are still wet, it's okay if they're starting to dry, but I'm going to notice where each petal sort of overlaps the other. And where they overlap in between, I'm just going to add little strokes at the edges of my petals. See how I'm doing that? So wherever I see the edge of petals, I'm just adding a little stroke. Okay, do you see how I'm doing that? I'm not putting too much, but I'm just using the tip of my brush to sort of add a little bit of that mix of ochre leger and Cienne Brulee to the edges of the petals. And all this does is it gives it a little bit of definition where those petals overlap one another. So it's just sort of the edge of each petal, lightly going over it. And because they're still a little bit wet, the line that we put down will be very diffuse. There. Add a little bit more. Just want to define the edges of each petal as I work my way around. These petals that are sort of underneath it all, that are very light, we can put just a tiny bit, but we don't need too much on those. Just a little bit of definition here and there. Okay. So now that this is sort of dry, I'm going to put one more glazed layer of the blue just by taking my brush just full of the blue and just sort of dropping it in, skipping around and just dropping in little bits of the blue. Now, I'm very happy with this. And this is our completed sunflower. And so what I think I'll do is I'll let this dry, and then I'll use a pencil or a beautiful pen, and I'll just write a simple message here at the bottom. Something like sending you joy. That's it. And then just put my monogram on it, and then I can send it out in the mail to someone and brighten their day. So this is our sunflower project. It's very simple, and yet we're learning a lot here. We're learning about layering different colors to get the effect of many petals one on top of the other. We learned about a petal shape by putting our pointed round down, pressing it down, pulling it out, and then lifting it up to create the point at the end, which can be used on many, many different kinds of flowers. We learned about glazing colors to bring unity and some vibrancy to our work, okay? And then we also learned about using a very dilute mix of a color a little bit darker than our petals to sort of randomly define the edges. Very, very subtle and soft. All right, so there's a lot of learning here, even though it's a super fun and simple project, and it looks beautiful. So I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll give it a try. Give it a try more than once. Okay, every time you do these petals, they'll get better. And remember to be random, and some are short and some are longer. Some have a little curl at the end. All of that is a wonderful thing to include. So I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you're having a great day wherever you are. And as always, I invite you to come see what we're doing on Patreon. I will also post this video on my Patreon for my patrons, so they don't have to go to YouTube to see if there's anything new. But we have lots going on there. There's new projects all the time, lots of learning, very in-depth techniques, things like that. It's $5 a month, and you get quite a lot of content for that. And with that money, it allows me to create more videos and to spend more time answering questions and attending to people's questions. It's a wonderful thing, and I really, really appreciate all those who support me there. So for YouTube, next week I'll be back with a new dandelion lesson, and until then, have a wonderful time and happy painting. Thank you. Bye-bye.